Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about why I got licensed in ham radio and how you can get licensed too. There's a vast amount of reasons why you can join in on ham radio and why many other hams actually got into ham radio. But today I'm going to talk about the reasons why I got in and how you can get in as well. One of the reasons to get in ham radio is to join in on the fun. There's so many different things you can do with ham radio, such as experimentation, talking to satellites, using digital modes, and talking to people all around the world with the right hardware or software and license. One of the reasons why I got into ham radio was so that I could understand the underlying technology of Wi-Fi actually. I looked down at our Wi-Fi router and I thought, how does that actually convert data into waves and back into data? And I knew ham radio was the hobby that I would be able to learn how that actually works. Since I've got into ham radio, I've learned tons about how signals work, how propagation works, how antennas function, and even how those digital packets used for computer networking is converted to analog waves and transmitted across the air. Another reason why I didn't actually get into ham radio for this, but as I've grown and started a family of my own, I've got a lot more interested in prepping for disasters. Although there is tons of layers to preparing for a disaster, communication is a very important part of preparing. And just purchasing a ham radio and throwing it in a closet in case you ever need it is most likely not going to allow you to communicate down the road because you won't know how to use it properly. Take the recent events at the time of this recording, for example. Hurricane Helene hit the Florida coast and flooded a good part of the eastern coast. In fact, it absolutely poured from Hurricane Helene where I'm at, but fortunate for us, we was not impacted by floods. However, in neighboring states, it's a very bad situation, unfortunately. However, and ones who know how to operate them are using their ham radios to communicate and to figure out paths to get gasoline and to check on their loved ones. In North Carolina, there is a repeater that's being used right now for emergency operations. I'll share a link to that in the description below where you can listen to it. But the ones who have a ham radio and underlying knowledge are able to communicate to the repeater to get information out. These are just one of few reasons why people choose to be amateur radio operators, but it's actually not that hard to get started. All you really have to do to get licensed is pass an exam that the FCC has set up, and the good part is they actually release all the questions and their answers, and you just have to be able to pass the exam. I was able to get my tech license with just 1 or 2 weeks of studying, and I had no previous knowledge of this whatsoever. There are many different materials online that you can use to get your license, to study, and to pass the exam and get your tech license. I went for my technician license. These were in person only. You had to drive to a club or an exam center in order to take your exam. However, since 2020, they've now been allowing online exams. These exams are actually administered by volunteers who wants to see more people get into amateur radio. So the people who's given these exams are rooting for you and want you to succeed. If you do decide you want to take an exam, you'll need to be able to study and understand some of the basics of amateur radio in order to pass the exam. Like I say, it's really not that hard. You're only asked 35 questions on the technician exam, and like I said earlier, they do release all questions for that exam and their answers. So you can be prepared for the exam. I promise you it's not that hard. In order to study for the exam, there's tons of materials online. Some are free, some are paid. One of the great ways to learn about amateur radio to start with is to join a club. Joining a club or going to a club meeting is a great way to get knowledge to amateur radio because those people will be willing to teach you and work with you and maybe even let you use their radio and get on air before you're even licensed. To my understanding, that is legal as long as they're there with you and able to walk you through that process and make sure you're following the laws. Another great resource, and I actually learned quite a bit from this before I got licensed, is through YouTube videos. There are tons of free content out there, such as this channel. There are other great channels such as Ham Radio Crash Course, Ham Radio Tube, and many others that I watched to help me get licensed. One great resource, and this is actually what I use the most for my technician and general exams, is hamradioprep.com. It does cost, but the way that they gave practice exams is actually how I learned very well. and I'm able to pass these exams. HamRadioPrep.com breaks their lessons down into small bite-sized pieces where you can have just a few minutes here and there to practice. They start out with a short video of that lesson and then a section that you can read. And then they have actual test questions that you can test your knowledge against to make sure that you actually do pass the exam before you go. They even have a guarantee that if you don't pass the exam, then they will give you your money back. I have used HamRadioPrep.com for my tech and my general license. I passed both times with flying colors without failing. Another great resource is hamstudy.org. I haven't used it very much because HamRadioPrep.com actually includes some of the same stuff, but hamstudy.org is a great free resource where it tests you on these questions and it explains the answers as you go. I do highly recommend hamstudy.org, but since I had already paid for hamradioprep.com, I didn't actually need it. When it actually comes test time, I took my general exam through wm7x.net, and I loved going through them because I was able to actually sign up for my exam as soon as I decided I was ready, and within a few minutes, I actually was able to take the exam, and I think about 10 or 15 minutes later, I was finished and licensed. All in all, it took me about 1 hour from the time that I signed up to the time I was completed, and I had my general license. I highly recommend going through them or a service like them. And hamstudy.org actually has a section where you can find exam locations, whether it be online or in person. And I will put the link in the description to that service below. I really hope this helps encourage you to go study and get licensed, because having a radio and learning to use a radio is two complete separate things. Having that Baofeng in your closet is great, but it's not helpful if there's an emergency, because you won't know what frequency to use or how to get into a repeater. For example, many repeaters has an output and an input on different frequencies, and some of them even require a code to key it up. So if you don't know those things ahead of time or able to figure those things out ahead of time, then when it becomes an emergency, you won't know how to get into the repeater anyway. Having the license and knowing how to use it is worth a lot to me, not only for preparation, but for learning and for helping out others. I would like to end this video by saying I'm very thankful to the ham operators at North Carolina. Although I'm not involved, I have been listening, and I will say them people, they're volunteers and they're doing a very great job. I hope this video helps you out, and I hope it encourages you to go get licensed.